everybody. We're back this week with Halbert Katzen again. You might remember him from a couple weeks ago when we did a great episode about the MCPH1 gene. Halbert is back to talk about the Shroud of Turin this week. And the Shroud of Turin is a really controversial topic within the Urantia community, especially because of a certain quote. And I have that quote right here. This is Gabriel talking to Michael, where he is basically telling him some guidelines for his bestowal on Earth. And one of the things he tells him, he says, refrain from all writing upon permanent materials and join your associates to make no images or other likenesses of yourself in the flesh. See that nothing potentially idolatrous is left on the planet at the time of your departure. So the shroud might fall into that category. And I'm just curious what you think about that.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me again on your program here. I really appreciate getting a second bite at the apple so quickly so that I can kind of, get used to this and get better at this with you. I appreciate your time and efforts, and especially for taking on this controversial topic that is timely, it's perennial, it's controversial, and I love the way you've brought us right to the fundamental issue for Urantia Book readers of why the whole thing um, eh, becomes off-putting in a certain way. I'm not saying this passage gets to the root of it. I think that's something to discuss, why people are so triggered by it. But in terms of pulling something from the text to support the idea that this is a rabbit hole, a red herring, a non-issue, and we should let it go. You've, I think, certainly pulled up the quote that is the go-to quote. I want to focus in on a couple things related to that and get into the specifics of the quote. But I also want to, I think, first, just for a moment, address the psychological, social, emotional aspect of it that we've mentioned, that this is used to shut down conversation. And
Yeah.
I just want us to step back for a moment and appreciate, on a broader level of perspective, the Urantia book by its nature, by its purpose, by intelligent design, is just ripe with all of these things to go explore. It is seeded with so much stuff, right?
Yeah.
From like the You Be the News project type thing of new discoveries catching up to it. We've got coined words, we've got human sources, we've got biblical quotes and other quotes, and it doesn't say where the quote comes from. So there's all that to explore, plus the content itself. I mean, it's just a true text for inspiring learning, discovery, exploration, inspiring conversations, and encouraging people to dig deeper and integrate the text with the world around us. So I just want to say from the get-go, this whole perspective of let's turn this off just as quickly as possible, make it a non-issue, and literally shame people who bring it up uh, is really quite counterproductive. And I think that this is an accurate depiction of energetic currents within the Urantia community that are long-standing and are most unfortunate. I've experienced them directly myself a lot because I started the Be the News project and did the Shroud of Turin report. So I'm a magnet for the energy. And, I've made all kinds of mistakes along the way in how I communicate this or have developed the project or this, that, or the other. But I don't take it too personally, particularly with this issue, because it's a triggering issue. Before I ever showed up with anything, before the Urantia book was here, it was already a controversial issue for people, and especially people from a Catholic tradition. And not surprisingly, something like the Urantia Revelation, a new religious text, is attracting people who have become disenchanted with their religious heritages, as well as many people who didn't have one at all. But the disenchanted types are certainly a part
Yeah.
of that influx of interest in the Urantia book. I'm one of those from the Jewish tradition. But there are many people who come from a Catholic tradition, and there are reasons why both the Jewish tradition and the Catholic tradition, I think, especially push children out of the faith, um, and do so in a way that just becomes generally emotionally charged. It's a painful process. It's known as guilt tripping, right? These
Yeah.
are the two religions that are especially known for guilt tripping. And so I think uh, as much as we like to look at ourselves as coming to the Urantia Revelation liberated from our past, uh, to a degree, we may bring along some baggage. We may bring along some virtues from our historical traditions and experiences. And I think that's alive and well here with this topic, and we should be on guard about it and aware of it. And in my experience of all of this over the last, it's been almost 20 years since I wrote that report, this is one of the takeaways that I've had with it. And so I just wanted to kind of share that from the beginning. Uh, I want us to remember that this is an opportunity to start conversations and present information about how the Urantia book relates to the world around us that's extremely intriguing. However you end up slicing and dicing it, or think this is more true or that's more correct, or whatever, the conversation's just ripe as can be. And so I want to thank you for bravely venturing forth with me into this perennially controversial topic.
Yeah,
I,
well,
I,
absolutely, and I think that's a really good point that you bring up because I do come from probably more of a scientific background before I found, the Urantia book and religion and spirituality. And the last time I really studied the Shroud of Turin was back then before I had like a spiritual awakening. And so I watched a few documentaries on it back then, and somebody who at the time did not believe in Jesus, didn't, really wasn't really sure if he was even a real person type of thing. So I kind of probably brushed off any information about the Shroud of Turin as, woo woo type stuff. And so I've never really given it a fair shot since I've had my spiritual awakening. I've never really looked into it in a fair way. I briefly studied a couple of your reports, but I haven't dove in really deep. So I'm hoping that you can fill in all the gaps of the information that I don't have, and hopefully a lot of people that are watching too can get a lot of the information that they're missing, and be able to make up their own mind with all the updated information that's available.
well, before I get into the details, I want to thank you for sharing that particular story about how your first experiences with it before you even had faith, because you're really setting me up for the remarks I want to make here at the beginning. As you'll see, that's perfect, because one of my overarching themes with all of this is, the UB the News project has been about education for outreach, reaching people who don't have faith already, and in this case, as you've brought up, we've got people all over the world, just like you, different from you, but one way or another, basically starting out in life with Jesus, faith in God. I'm not so sure. I don't know what to believe here. This is not captivating me. I've got issues with this. And anyone coming from that more agnostic, atheistic perspective naturally is going to be dismissive about the shroud, right?
Right.
So, on just sort of a logical level, it's up to people of faith to make it interesting, fun, and have something to talk about,
Yeah.
right? Because there's a problem there, right? Like we've got people who might be interested if you had something to talk about, and they couldn't be more in need because they're faithless and don't believe in Jesus and are questioning everything. So, you know,
Yeah.
there we go. Okay, so now though, let's venture directly into some of the specific statements that get to the value principles that are rightfully wanting to be honored and promoted in a way that that guides our thinking, right? Like this is wisdom. This is celestial wisdom given to Jesus. So it is very important. And what's it saying? Don't leave writings behind, and enjoin your associates to not be making any images or likenesses of you, because this becomes idolatrous. Okay, don't be sitting for pictures. So the first thing I want to point out is that these are things that, generally speaking, not completely, but to a degree, are very much in his control, or at least his influence. So he cannot write on permanent objects. He can go destroy the writings he already had,
Yeah.
recognizing that when I was younger, I didn't realize my full divinity and wasn't quite in that stage. I wrote down these things. Now it's a problem. I'm going to go back. I'm going to destroy them. People will wonder why. They won't understand, but
Yeah.
what are you going to do? Right?
Yeah. Well, and there's
Okay.
that passage, I think it's in the Bible, where he writes in the sand.
In the Gospel of John, there is a story where Jesus is writing on the ground with his finger while in the presence of a crowd.
It's like one
Yeah.
of the only
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
where it really talks about him writing, but obviously in
Right.
the sand, you just wipe it clean.
Yeah. And obviously, this thing about not sitting for a painting, this could truly come up in these times. He was going to be adored. He was going to be deified. This was a natural progression of events. You start doing miracles, and there's human tendencies that go with that. So he was being given some instructions to help people and work with the process. Now, this gets right to the issue that I focused on about you. You went from not having faith to faith, and you have one relationship to the shroud when you don't have faith, and then it's a different type of question when you do. And what's up with all of this? Okay. This whole business of we don't want to be idolatrous, and we don't want to be making fetishes out of religious objects from the past and having undue emotional attachment and veneration for them. We need, I think, to first appreciate that's a problem for the faithful. That has nothing to do with people who don't have faith. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So if we could just leave the faithful alone for a moment and appreciate the fact that Jesus here was here for a short lifetime. He had public perceptions about him and was doing public ministry for just several years. There were not printing presses back then. There was not photography. There was not videography. There was nothing to preserve it except people's memories and passing it down by word of mouth. And you could write it down, but, there were limitations to how effective we could be with it. And people got to experience miracles. When Jesus was here, profound things happened. And when he left, that meant that everyone got to have his spirit all at once through the spirit of truth. But it didn't mean that they got to have that type of visceral, in-person, I got healed.
Right.
Or my neighbor got healed. Or this is happening now. I saw the Urantia Jesus show up. I was with 500 people. We were all, and there he was, right?
Yeah.
These are profound experiences.
Yeah.
These are real experiences if you're faithful. If people are not faithful, they don't get to worry about being idolatrous. They should be so lucky as to have that problem. Right?
Right.
And so one of the first things I want to mention, to the Urantia community and just in the context of this is a revelation, is could we think a little less of ourselves and a little bit more about people who don't have faith, don't have belief, don't know why there's some good reason to believe in Jesus. And now we're going to start to get into the particulars, right?
Okay.
Now that I've set it up like that, we can at least appreciate that there's this purpose. The next obvious thing to say is that this is not just any relic to be idolatrous about. This is not like having a painting of Jesus. This is not like having writings of Jesus and then trying to put undue association on those particular words, and we're going to revolve our whole religious lives around interpreting these few words that he had left. Right? That's a real problem.
Yeah.
That's something to avoid. That's not what the Shroud of Turin is. The Shroud of Turin's proof of life and resurrection. The Shroud of Turin is that expression, if you believe it's true, that it's actually, accepted that way. I mean, that's the conversation, even if you don't. This is why it's important and interesting.
Okay.
Is that before the Urantia book ever showed up, and separate from whether you believe that was wrapped around Jesus and that Jesus was even a real person, separate from that, we should just start by appreciating, and I want to get back to the Urantia book and bring it back to this context some more, not leave this behind, but there's certain things about the Shroud of Turin that are pretty much universally agreed upon. And they create the context for the conversation, and they're so easily forgotten, and people try to put them aside by focusing too much on this fact or that fact that's disagreeable and ignoring the facts that everyone agrees on. Everyone agrees that that has existed long before photography was invented. We don't have a problem there. Everyone agrees that what makes the image is akin to the negative image that comes up in photography, where light is reversed with dark. And in order to better appreciate the image of Jesus or whoever, whatever the image is on the shroud, we need to take the time to do those photography reversals, with the dark and light parts of the image, in order to be looking at something that is interesting and meaningful to us and makes us go, see, there's something there. Like, check it out. Like, okay. So everyone agrees about that. It doesn't seem that there's any disagreement that the nature of the image itself has this, what we call like a nuclear image aspect to it. That is, there's a 3D imaging built into the image on the shroud. And this is why the face looks especially narrow. You'll be able to bring images up of this and show the audiences we're talking about this, of course. But that face looks narrow because the dark light gradations are overly accentuated in a patterned way. And that accentuation then makes the face look narrower, right? And there's programming that can be done to pull that out. And then they get these 3D images that can be shown of Jesus' face on the shroud. It's like way cool, and everyone's like so excited about it. And what is uncontroversial, like that itself is uncontroversial and phenomenal that it would have this quality at all, right? That we can analyze it this way, okay. But
Yeah.
it does bear mentioning that, of course, that regular photographs and paintings and everything, and those things that we're otherwise familiar with that would give us 3D imaging, they don't have those same gradation qualities. When you put that type of programming on them, they just look like a little mess. It messes them up. It doesn't give you depth, right? So the fact that this image would show up with these qualities, really peculiar. And then also, in addition to it, we have that it's extraordinarily superficial at the edges of the fibers. It's like these, bits of carbon that make the image. And it's like a double image. So that's another aspect of it where it doesn't matter how you date it, you still have this peculiarity. And what these peculiarities, the importance of them, the relevance of them, right? In human terms, just straight up human terms, no matter what you believe, is that no one can reproduce the thing. Either with modern technology or with technology of at least 700 years old. They universally agreed upon ages that it's at least, from back that far. So in either case, even with modern or medieval technology, no one's showing up going, hey, let me put this controversy to rest. This is how it was done, right? Here's how you get the result. Okay? Everyone relax, chill. It's not happening. So with all of this, that's why it's a perennial mystery. And people talk about it, and the conversation doesn't go away, and people can be as opinionated as they want and turn a deaf ear and a blind eye to the evidence and do all that stuff. People do that with the truth all the time, right? Let's not talk about it. Well, go ahead. I have more fun talking about it. And
Yeah.
I think the Urantia book, now bringing us back to the Revelation, is particularly written to encourage speculations and discovery on this topic. Right? It's not written to shut down the conversation. It's written to intrigue us about the conversation. And it does so in ways that immediately point us to issues that are relevant today, but were also relevant at the time that we've talked about, which is, we take it for granted. Believing Jesus resurrected on the third day. Let us recall that the accounting of that says it basically is just David who really believed. All the apostles were like, what do you mean you're going to die and resurrect on the third day? Here, Jesus can't die. He raises Lazarus from the dead. Like, they couldn't handle it emotionally. They didn't take him literally. It was David, right, who it was one of the people. And that just goes to show, right, what the landscape was like, even among the most faithful, believing, closely related people. And then with that in mind, we get descriptions from the Revelation that relate specifically to that issue. So let me go to 189:4-6. Mary saw only the folded napkin where his head had rested and the bandages wherewith he had been wrapped laying intact, as they had rested on the stone before the celestial hosts removed the body. The covering sheet lay at the foot of the burial niche. They, the women, conjectured that the body had been moved to another resting place, but when they pondered such a solution of their dilemma, they were at a loss to account for the orderly arrangement of the grave cloths. How could the body have been removed, since the very bandages in which was wrapped were left in position and apparently intact on the burial shelf? So the Urantia Book is giving us an understanding that the celestial beings involved with orchestrating this phenomenal event of removing the body and creating a time-accelerated elemental dissolution of it were arranging these burial cloths in specific ways that are creative. And we can see right away that this creativity creates a mystery that leaves the first people viewing it needing to conclude that the body could not have been taken away. And then later we get at 189:5-2, very soon Simon Peter rushed up and entering saw the empty tomb with the grave cloths so peculiarly arranged. Right? So there's a reinforcement of the theme. So I think we as Urantia Book readers, just amongst ourselves, and when we're communicating to non-believers about this, have an opportunity to explain and to appreciate what they were really dealing with here. Like, so for instance, from Urantia Book perspective, Jesus intended to talk about the family of God and ended up talking about the kingdom of God because the people couldn't handle the simple conversation about the family of God. They were too backwards. They had problems. And so in order to address those problems, he engaged in suboptimal changes to his original plan. Things that were going to create problems, but were also going to be better than doing nothing and just being overly idealistic and stiff-necked about it and say, you people need to get the family idea. What the hell's wrong with you? Right? I'm Jesus. What's this going to take already? Do I have to start talking kingdom? Is that what it's going to take? Right? Like, the eternal infinite wisdom got it. We're human.
Right.
Right? The incarnate Jesus had enough experience with humans to go, okay, you got your plans, you got your ideals, right? And then you got your adjustments. Your wise, experientially based adjustment. Jesus is dealing with apostles who can't deal with validating the spiritual equality of women and doing that socially within, the kingdom of God social structures.
Yeah.
As another example, right? There were all kinds of issues, and believing in the resurrection was one of them. And of course, the Urantia Book goes on at length about how challenging that was for the apostles and what they went through, and they're up in the chamber, and we don't need to rehash all of that, I don't think, right now, to just, sit back and appreciate that this has been a perennial problem from day one, right? And in this context, the authors of this revelation, if the shroud was not authentic, could have said something that would have established this, and could have been justified in doing it for the reasons that Urantia Book believers hail as so important.
Yeah.
Right? But they didn't, and in fact, they did just the opposite. That is, they wrote up a story about what happened that had facts unfolding in it that left all kinds of questions. Thrown over a cliff. Then what happened? Don't know. So now let's, if you like, delve into some particulars of my own research into this, and what the Urantia Revelation has to offer this conversation regarding the peculiarities of the Shroud of Turin. And so this really goes to that, in support of that wisdom, that they wrote this revelation, it seems to me, with there having been divine foreknowledge guiding the whole process of the shroud being left behind and everything. Okay, so I'm suggesting that there were different creative ways to deal with the fact that people don't believe and the body might be taken away and any other thing could have happened. But I want to suggest that Jesus' status incorporates a divine foreknowledge that, in all reasonableness, would have wanted to integrate this set of relics, the shroud and the headpiece and everything, with the Urantia Revelation. Like there was going to be opportunity there, right? Presumably Jesus knew the fifth epical revelation was coming in book form, especially once he was in Urantia form.
Yeah.
Right? He had all that available to him while he's in the flesh. So I think it's important for us to reflect on divine creativity and the options available, and why wouldn't they be used for the greater good of everybody when they're so abundantly available? And look how interesting this becomes, right? Especially when we get into some of the particulars about the shroud. And so one of them is the Urantia Book says that the soldier pierced Jesus on his left side. Okay. This makes a lot of sense for a number of reasons. One is it's reported that blood and water came out. And there's what's called the pericardial sac around the heart, which is a fluid sac that allows the heart, to beat in and have like a protective casing. And when we go through trauma, not surprisingly, that fluid sac expands to accentuate the protective layer because of trauma, right? So you have all that much more water with the blood. So the reports in the Bible about water coming out with the blood are consistent with being pierced through the heart, which is consistent with what a trained soldier would do in order to verify that someone was dead, because that's the more vulnerable side, and this is what they would do. And it's also consistent with being right-handed, and even left-handed Roman soldiers were required to operate like a right-handed Roman soldier so that they would all be uniform and aligned. So that, type of stabbing motion of a right-handed person stabbing the left side is all logical and consistent in what the Urantia book says. But then there's an issue that comes up with the Shroud of Turin, which is this. The perhaps intuitive thing to believe for people was that the image was made on the side of the shroud that was touching his body. That there's somehow like this direct relationship between the shroud and the body, that's where the image would be made. And so if that's true, then you've got a mirror image, not just a negative light to dark reversal. On top of that, you would also have a left to right reversal.
Okay.
Okay. So the Shroud of Turin presents a wound on the right side. The image was made on the side closest to Jesus' body.
Okay.
Right? That's how they're interpreting it. It's in that context. So if you make the opposite assumption, quite simply, that the image was made on the outside of the shroud, not the inside, then you're not reversing that. Left is left, right is right. Just as you're looking at someone, there's no reversing anything.
Okay.
Okay. So when you don't reverse it, then that wound is on the left side, like the Urantia book says. Images of the shroud, paintings done in like the 1600s, 1700s, often but not exclusively put the wound on Jesus' right side. Christianity is divided on the issue because they're well aware of the pericardial fluid sac and the analysis that would naturally be done about what's most logical regarding how a Roman soldier would work. And you can look that up and, straight up a question and a controversy within Christianity, within Catholicism, perhaps especially, regarding those who favor believing the shroud is authentic and want to figure it out, right? And have this as a conversation piece and think it's a valid artifact and interesting and, let's talk. So I think it bears mentioning as a Urantia book reader that this revelation addresses that perennial issue. They didn't have to, but it sure is kind of friendly, like in all seriousness. If this is designed to be, in a general sense, an expression to the world over time that the resurrection of Jesus is real, right? Then there we have it.
Right.
We've got all these intertwining things over time. We've got a reason for the believers to be interested. We've got reasons for the non-believers to be interested. We've got universal mysteries about it. We've just got all of these things to talk about. And then the Urantia book coming along and saying, hey, you know what? From a celestial perspective, we do appreciate that you're on a rebellion default sphere and that it sucks so badly that your humanity killed the Son of God who came down and, was a revelation to you all, and like you're all just a mess over it.
Yeah.
Have a bone.
Yeah.
Right?
I can see that. Yeah.
Like we're getting thrown bones all over the place in this book.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
Well, just even the book itself is a
it,
bone, like the
right, it's
biggest,
huge. Right, exactly. The whole thing is just that way by its nature. So, of course, I'm suggesting here as a reader believer that it's just plain old natural to expect more bones to chew on, and factoids that spin up all kinds of really interesting, fun conversations, whether you're a believer or not a believer, whatever you want to do with it. There's just so many angles to go.
Yeah.
Uh, I personally didn't even realize it was this interesting till several years ago when I first wrote the Shroud of Turin report. I wasn't really hip to this left-right issue sufficiently. I didn't delve into it enough. But, just to give the listeners a little more sense of what they can find in the report to tie this together, why do I think the image was made on the outside of the shroud, not the inside? Aside from it just aligning with the facts and trying to, twist it in there or something. If you look at close-up images of the Shroud of Turin, where there's bloodstain, there's much more blood between the threads than there is on top. I mean, it just plain old looks like the blood's coming from the back, not the front. And so from a Urantia Book perspective, if we're having to presume that there was some type of force field created to shield that part of material reality from the time acceleration process, then we're dealing with them having to do that in relationship to the body and the blood touching the shroud. Right? And there's going to be blood on the shroud, soaked through, presumably, because, that's what happened. But there's going to be more on the inside than on the outside. And the inside is where you're going to have that force field most activated. That is, the closer to the body you are, that's where you got to have the time acceleration force field. However that works, beats me. I don't need, though, a lot of physics or anything, I don't think, to just draw the common sense conclusion that we know from just forces generally. If you're further away, it's not as forceful. It's kind of like why we call them forces. They do stuff, right? Further you get away from them, the less forceful, the less they're doing stuff. Okay. So I think all of this really fits very, very well with the description in the Urantia Book of this time-accelerated phenomenon that got rid of Jesus' biological body, that necessarily had blood where there's no easy sort of interpretation about what's body, what's blood, what's all going to be taken, what's not. Pardon me, it's a fluid situation, right? So the Celestials are having to deal with this. They're dealing with it presumably in a context where if they don't know that the shroud's going to be created with this double image and that it's going to be preserved and, go through all of this history, they at least have some sensibilities about the processes they're going through and how they're going to work and everything. So I just think that, this is what happened, basically. However much foreknowledge the angels were given or not, they were given enough instruction and they were in control of physical processes that could accelerate time, that would have predictable consequences. It's all quite miraculous to us on the one hand, but it still operates by laws that the Urantia Book affirms. Like, all that happened was time was accelerated, nothing else weird.
Right.
They're specific this way. And so, since they're taking the time to give us these details, I think uh, it's a wonderful opportunity to speculate and to consider how all this relates to the Shroud of Turin. Why not? It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Making the most of a bad situation, It's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
gotta.
So is there any information on so I know you said that everyone agrees that it's at least 700 years old in terms of dating. And I remember from documentaries that I watched, one of the theories that came up was that this was a hoax by Leonardo da Vinci, like a painting or some kind of artwork that he had did, and around that time. Uh, like I said, these are old documentaries. I haven't really kept up with the information, so I don't know how outdated that information is. But is there any dating information that maybe puts it further back than 700 years, or is that
Oh, yes. Oh, there certainly is. There's all kinds of reasons to call into question the carbon dating that was done back in, I think, 78 or so. There's an enormous amount of factual material to support that it came from the times of Jesus. And there's all kinds of material out there that seems kind of bogus and overreaches and tries to make more of stuff than what's there. At this point in time, there's been plenty of time and plenty of interest for people to come up with all kind of stuff, right?
yeah?
But you've got shroud.com, which is the best resource for culling through that and presenting peer-reviewed, deeply detailed analysis. It's not hard to get to the better stuff in this case. I was very fortunate to have a conversation with the gentleman who was the curator of that website and the photographer for that project back in the 70s. And I did have an opportunity, therefore, to talk to him about, hey, well, did you photograph the back much? And, all of this. And the way he talked about it, basically, the short of it, it just gave me all the more confidence that my theory was correct. In other words, they were so dismissive of there being any value or relevance to the other side of it. It was just largely ignored. And so I just find that interesting, but not surprising, because that whole process of doing that research and everything on it's been challenging to work with the church on this type of stuff. And so there's just all kinds of stories of how those challenges can affect the quality of the research and get people on board and agreeing about what's true and what's not. And that's why I like to start with what everyone agrees upon when it comes to any of these types of conversations. Because if what's agreed upon in this case is so much of a mystery, then that's an important context for looking at something like carbon dating. And that's where I want to say, like, first things first, right? Are we dealing with a situation that is truly peculiar no matter what you say the carbon dating is? Or are we dealing with the situation where we need ourselves some carbon dating so we can figure this out? Well, we're not dealing with the latter situation. You can carbon date out the wazoo, and there's certain unquestionable facts about that create enormous mystery. And so I think that that's important to remember as a person researching anything. You want to get to the bottom of something, you've got to explain all the mysteries. You can't just create a false dichotomy of a simple test that, I mean, sometimes you can do that to, like, preserve a mystery or something, but it's hard to do it in the opposite way to be fully conclusive when you have multivariable calculus involved in the nature of what you're talking about. And you're going to have these categories of things that everybody agrees on and then things that people question the validity of. And when the things that everyone agrees on are just so darn mysterious, like, for me, that's what I want to build on, because that's what creates a conversation, I believe, that doesn't go around in circles so much. It really tends to have some logical, linear, you can have an agenda-driven goal, and it's okay. You might actually get there. You know what I mean? So that's basically, I suppose, what I have to say on the subject at this point. I recently redid the report and republished it on UB Annotated from its original publishing on ubthenews.com. It really needs completely redone at this point. But there's a lot there for people to work with, and it is what it is. But it is one of those perennial topics that's been evolving with me over time. As I said, it was just a few years ago that I did this left versus right analysis. Doing this presentation with you inspired me to think about this in ways that I hadn't thought about it before. That if I was writing about it now, would get incorporated into the writing, but isn't there at this point. And so thank you for preserving some of my thoughts through this podcast and stimulating me to do some rewriting at some point and incorporating it.
Well, absolutely. And thank you for expanding my mind on this topic. And like I said, it's not something I've really looked into in a long time. And I'm definitely really interested now to where I'm probably going to go do a bunch of research on it just to learn more so I can get up to date. And I did have one question though. Just wanted to clarify. I'm pretty sure I understand what you're saying, but in terms of the dissolution process of basically, okay, as I understand it in the Urantia book, I mean, Jesus is wrapped in the shrouds when his body is um for lack of a better word, time
Dissolved through a time acceleration process would be one way to say it.
there. That's yeah, that's what I was looking for. I just tried, it's like, how do I say this? That's what I was trying to say. So he's in the wrappings, right? And his body goes through this process. And so what you're saying is the image that's on the shroud, it's on the outside because of that. It's like going through the shroud from the inside out. And so that's why the image is being shown on the outside.
Yes, and when you pull up the left is right appendix or topical study, whatever you want to call it, that I did a few years ago on this, you'll find an image that I created where I drew a conceptualization of what I'm talking about, and you can use that, of course. It's not really clear to me from the Urantia Revelation exactly what the whole process was in terms of managing things like the wrappings. So we've got three different types of cloth. We've got the wrappings that are soaked in aloe and myrrh and these embalming type oils and such and spices. Then you've got the shroud, and then you've got the face covering. The wrappings around the body are particularly mysterious in the sense that did they accompany Jesus out, the body of Jesus outside, and then they were brought back? I mean, presumably the shroud went outside with the body so that the image could be made, but maybe not. Maybe just getting the body outside of the wrappings would also involve getting him outside of the shroud, and that was all done within the tomb. And then they did the time accelerated thing that actually got rid of the body. Are those two different processes, or are they the same? You know, beats me. I have no idea.
Right.
But there is this double image, and there are these two different sets of bandages.
Right.
So
Is there?
I don't have a real theory other than these are peculiar things. There's associations you can make, but it doesn't seem to really lead to a very specific conclusion.
Yeah. So what about the bandages? Anything like, I mean, is there any claims that those exist or
Not that I'm aware of, no.
no? Yeah.
Just
And the,
the Sudarium of Ovida is what it's called. The face napkin has a lineage. And one of the things I'll mention that's interesting about that, just since we're here talking details and all, is that there's correlations, that is bloodstains and things like this, between the Sudarium and the shroud that seem to relate them very
oh,
powerfully, right? There's
okay.
reasons to think that the one was associated with the other. And the time period for the Sudarium is significantly older than the carbon dating that was done on the shroud. So right there, for instance, separate from the carbon dating issue, you've got this fact pattern that relates to it that
Right.
calls it into question. You just don't know what to think and why. The shroud was burned at times. This can affect carbon dating. It's who
It was
knows?
burned. How do you mean burned?
Fires in the churches.
Oh,
Yeah,
so like
yeah.
smoke
Like it barely
damage? Like,
survived. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. That
Yeah, okay.
you see these big diamonds on it. That's burn dam.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So it was sitting on something that had like a diamond pattern in the smoke, like something like that.
I
Probably.
couldn't tell you,
Yeah.
but the way it was folded up, it's where the folds intersect. There'll be this.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So it's like at the edges, were burned, and then it creates a diamond when you unfold.
Right. Huh.
So this thing's been through hell
Yeah.
and
Sounds like it.
back.
Yeah.
And we should respect it,
Yeah.
and make the most of it. And I think not worry about getting too medievally idolatrous about it.
Yeah.
This is not like the Holy Grail. This is not like a piece of the cross. This is proof of life.
Yeah.
This is evidence of an event regarding the greatest miracle in our universe. It should not be relegated to the status of some memento. And I think, like, if I were to just sum up for you what, in a sense, bothers me the most about the negative Urantia book reader reactions to this, is that they're quite unfairly relegating this extraordinary piece of history to the status of some memento or something have idolatrous associations, when the real issue is people need to believe in the resurrection. And the more help they can get with that, if they're having trouble, the better. And the more people can understand that the life and teachings of Jesus is best expressed through the Urantia Revelation, the better. So the more we can use the Shroud of Turin to accomplish those goals, I'm thinking, the better.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, anything else you'd like to add to this topic, or?
No, I'm happy to leave it there, and just to thank you so much for
Yeah.
working with me on this. I hope the technology comes out better, and we're making progress that way. And
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is all good, and I appreciate it, and look forward to another new topic. We'll have to get together and suss that out and see what might be next for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking something in the astronomy, cosmology, something along those lines,
Sure,
maybe. I'd
sure.
love to jump into, because that's my playground. That's where I like to spend a lot of time thinking about. So I'd love to jump into one of those kind of topics with you. But yeah, it's been a pleasure having you, and thank you so much for doing this, and thanks for expanding my mind on this topic and issue. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. God bless
All
you,
right.
sir.
Yeah, God bless. You have a
Bye
great
bye.
rest of your day.
You too.